أمار على عبد ضربني من ضربته للقاع ذبني.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Dear respected brothers and sisters and viewers of Imam Hussein TV, and welcome back to this Fatemiyah series in which we explore the importance of Fatemiyah and its importance in our Shia identity. In the past couple of nights we've discussed many topics: Fatima al-Zahra's relationship with the oppressors, her relationship with her family. But tonight I want to discuss why all of this matters. An event that happened 1400 years ago, it's vital that we explore how it's relevant to us. And inshallah, helping me doing so is Sheikh Vinay Khetia. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikhna.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm great, alhamdulillah.
Now, Sheikhna, big question, and it's an open question. Why does all of this matter?
It's a good question that you've asked, and it matters for two reasons. One is ethical, and the other one is ideological. The ethical one is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us in the Quran about those who mix the haqq with the batil. So how do we sort out truth from falsehood if we don't know what falsehood is? So we need to identify what truth is for ourselves. We need to be on a journey of knowledge, a journey of seeking knowledge, identify what that truth means. What is haqq? What does the truth mean to me? And once I've identified that truth, then I can see what its opposite is. So you only know, so love is understood in relation to hate. Truth is understood in relation to falsehood. Right? They become polar opposites of one another. Positive is understood in terms of negative. I'm not making a philosophical argument here. This is more of a rhetorical thing that I'm trying to say, right? So the Imams of Ahlul Bayt salamullahi alayhi have recommended us to know who Ahlul Batil are, or the people who are not on the position of truth, or their mawqif is not one of truth, of haqq. Again, this is in the view of the Ithna Ashari viewpoint of history and the way they see the past, as a general point of view. So that's one important point. I think that's an ethical point of view. Historically, it's interesting to see how ideas develop, where they come from, how the process of what is known as identity formation. There's a non-Muslim author by the name of Marshall Hodgson. He's written a book called The Venture of Islam. It's not written according to our Aqidah or anything, so I'm not recommending it for people to go and read this book so they can learn about our beliefs. He just mentions something interesting as a historical point in this book. In volume 1, he mentions that the events that occurred after the death of the Prophet were as formative, or does he say more, but let's say at least as formative as the Prophet's own life. Because identities, groups were formed in relation to their vision of what happened in the past.
What do you mean by...
See, the present is shaped.
Okay.
Present identities are often shaped in relation to how they understood the past. Because there's a belief that in the past, we believe that there was a prophet. The prophet had a community. The prophet was the best of prophets. So people want to follow whatever is closest to that sacred messenger, to his practice, and to the Quran, and to the time that is closest, or the people and the events that are related to that closest period of time, to the period of revelation, to the period of the Prophet. Now the events that would occur after the death of the Prophet would then become formative for the events that come after. For example, the way Sunni identity was formed, the way Shia identity came to be understood and came to be formed in relation to the events that happened earlier. So when we understand historical events in detail as to how they've been presented, how they have been written, how different sides have presented different aspects of that event, then we're able to understand to an extent why certain beliefs, practices, or ideologies continue today. Do you see where I'm going with this? So there's two reasons. There's an ethical reason to know haq from batil, and then there's a simple kind of reason from the point of intellectual history.
That's fair, I would say. But someone out there watching would say, what is the point? Why bring up the past? You know, we've learned from it. Move on. Why do we remember it every single year?
Good question, Minhal. We've learned from it. So is Qadiyatu Zahra salamullahi alayha, or the remembrance of the tragedies of any of the A'imma, especially Imam Hussein, something, okay, well, we learned the history of it now, so move on from it. It's like we finished that chapter in the book, let's move on. But now there's a third aspect to all of this. So the first one is just knowing haq from batil, the truth from falsehood. Number two is the intellectual history part. And I'm not putting these three in any particular order. Number three is there is a reward in the dhikr of the awliya of Allah. There's a reward from Allah to love those that love Allah. And when you love someone, you want to talk about them all the time. Isn't it? When someone's on your mind, you're constantly thinking about them. You're constantly mentioning them to other people. Oh, you know, did you see this person did this? Oh, you know, if it's a lady, she'll say, oh, well, you know, my husband does the same thing. Or if it's a woman, or if it's a man, he'll say, oh, you know, my wife does the same thing. Or you know what? That's just like my, you know, my little Sumayya, or, you know, because when you love someone, you're constantly remembering them, right? Now, if we have an affinity with our spiritual heroes, our spiritual figures of the past, then we want to remember them. And if something tragic happened to them, wouldn't we want to remember them? Of course. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that this is a muwaddah, that it's a sign of showing love, is that we are showing empathy and sadness and emotion towards a harrowing event. It's logical. It's not about living in the past. I think it's human nature. It's not like every single day we're, you know, doing matam and we're not moving on with, we're not doing anything else in our life. We're not building businesses. We're not serving the community. We're not feeding the poor. We're not taking care of our children, taking care of our families. No. Everything has its place and its time, depending on the month, depending on the time of the year. There are different marasim and there are different occasions. And remembering the tragedy of Sayyidah Zahra salamullahi alayha, or the lessons that we take, the ethical lessons that we take from her life, has great benefit to our iman.
So you're saying that it has an effect with our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Absolutely, because it strengthens our belief in the idea that there were and are great spiritual heroes that walk the earth, whether they be female or male. The amazing thing is here we're talking about a female spiritual hero. I mean, it's amazing not because there are female spiritual heroes. There are many, many, many. But it's amazing because we live in a time where there's a notion that, oh, you know, we don't give attention towards the female aspect of spirituality or female spiritual figures, which is not true. But coming back to the point, the dhikr and the remembrance of the daughter of Rasulullah is the dhikr of Rasulullah himself, and the dhikr of Rasulullah is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Imam as-Sadiq said that the sadness, the gham and the ham for us in one's heart is two things. It's tasbih and ibadah. It's the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and an act of worship of Allah. Because when we remember the ones who loved Allah, we learn to love Allah through their love.
Interesting, Sheikhna. Yesterday or last night, we didn't really finish the events of Saqifa that had happened. Could we maybe continue with that?
Yeah, sure. So basically what happened was, after Saqifa, there was a group of people that supported Amir al-Mu'mineen. A group of companions that supported Amir al-Mu'mineen, right? Among them was Salman and others. They gathered in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. At that point, Abu Bakr and Umar felt, and this is well known in the historical sources. What I'm bringing up here is not, this is, if you take any history course, even in a university, in early Islamic history, or you read the works of Wilfred Madelung and others, you'll see this in the books. It's not something, that is outrageous. They gathered in the house of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salamullahi alayhi. And they were not pledging allegiance to Abu Bakr. They felt there was some connection to Ali. And the interesting that the hadith says Manzil Fatima.
Yeah.
House of Fatima. Yeah. That's a different story. There's a different discussion there. But they gathered in the house. Abu Bakr and Umar felt that this is a challenge to their authority. Seeing it from their perspective, from a moment, simply from a political military angle, not from an ethical religious angle, I could see. Imagine someone has done a coup d'etat. They've taken over the leadership of the community. Now what they want to do is they want to make sure that they silence every pocket of resistance. Just like what was done in Burma and other places, right? So they want to silence every pocket of resistance against their leadership, their usurpation of leadership. At least this is how it's viewed kind of through a Shi'i lens, Shi'i vision, which Shi'is believe is the vision of the Imams, not a Shi'i vision, but the vision of the Imams themselves. Now what are they going to do? Time has come to either ask them to settle down or to use force. And this is where things start getting out of hand.
Now, when it comes to the pledging of allegiance, as per se, were there some of them that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam ordered to maybe give in? Or were there some of them that gave in from themselves? They said, I can't be bothered for this headache. I'm just going to give in, go and live my life. Or did they stay loyal to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam?
Some of them had no choice. It was for just simply to make peace in the community. Because if they didn't, war would continue. Right? And I think a lot is made out of this pledging of allegiance to the Khalifa of the time, but at that time, especially Abu Bakr. But you have to remember the Muslim community was in such an initial stage that everything could have fallen apart. And the question is it worth it for everything to fall apart? Like everything to come to an end? Yeah. That's a question to ask, right? So some of them did. Some of them unwittingly did. And a series of events would now take place, of which we don't have a complete, absolute, crystal clear picture of every event that took place. But what we know is there were now a series of interactions that would take place between Ali and Fatima salamullahi alayhima ajma'in and the leadership of the time. And then the after effects of this would be enormous. The tension that would occur, because Ali would now choose not to leave his home to compile the Quran. And this is especially after his wife's martyrdom. So basically they insisted to get these people out of the house. If they don't come out of the house, we're going to burn it down.
And was that the first interaction, or was that an interaction that came later on after the initial one? Because I wouldn't imagine, as in a human being, to be so, let's say, defensive in an offensive manner. And what I mean by that is, when they found out that Ali, Salman and others were in the house of Fatima, they were defensive in the sense that they wanted to straight away get the bay'ah, or the pledge of allegiance, in an offensive way, in a threatening way. You know, so I don't know, from my perspective, that as a human being, you'd go ask, maybe try sit down with them, not straight away go.
Good question. No, they did ask them to leave the house, right? The riwayah states that one of the riwayat in Al-Ayashi's tafsir does state, now we can debate about the authenticity of the riwayah, but Ayashi is a very early source, and when we put it together with the other sources, it does indicate to us that something happened here. At least how early Shi'i memory presents it. Ayashi's tafsir, in Ayashi's work, there is a narration that states that Omar sent this person, I think Gunfud, means porcupine. Clearly his name I don't think was Porcupine, but probably is a nickname of some sort, or the sources have given him this nickname. To go to the house of Fatima, salamullahi alayha, to ask them to insist that they come out. Sayyidah Zahra refused, closed the door on them. So then he says, okay. He came. I believe it was Khalid ibn Walid who came, who was the enforcer, and he kicked the door down on her. And something happened between the men and them, because another riwayah states that in Yaqubi's history, that Ali comes out of the house, salamullahi alayhi, and they basically wrestle him down. And in another tradition, in Al-Imama wa Siyasa, which is not for Ibn Qutayba Dinawari, it's for some other Maghribi Sunni historian, but of an early period, of a relatively early period, from the 5th century earlier, we could say. He says in there that Ali was brought to Abu Bakr and Omar. So there was something like being chained up, dragged, imprisoned, threatened. So then they threatened to murder him, threatened to kill him. He said, would you kill the brother of the Prophet? Would you kill the cousin of the Prophet? They said, as for being the cousin, yes. As for being the brother, no. So Umar said, you're not the brother of the Prophet. Yeah. It's a level of hate that he had towards Ali, as per some of the historical traditions that we see, which are in both Shia and non-Shia sources. That's the interesting part of this, because Al-Imam wa Siyasa has a whole chapter on the Imam of Abu Bakr, talking about Abu Bakr from a positive lens. So clearly this man who's writing is not a Shi'i, or at least was not a 12er.
I mean, Sheikh, I can see why, for example, let's say Abu Sufyan would hate Amir al-Mu'mineen. I can see why Muawiyah would hate Amir al-Mu'mineen, because he's killed, you know, many of their family members and that kind of stuff. What exactly has Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, done to the family of Umar for him to have this kind of hate?
Nothing. It's called hasad, jealousy. It's called jealousy. You see, Amir al-Mu'mineen was given preference by the Prophet. Amir al-Mu'mineen was younger. Amir al-Mu'mineen was younger, and he was closer to the Prophet. And other people felt that, look, we've put in our time. Why can't we get the raise? Similar to what happened with Talha and Zubayr.
In Jamal, yeah.
Right? But what led them to come to Jamal? They felt that Amir al-Mu'mineen was not giving them their fair due. Oh, we're companions of the Prophet, so on and so forth. We should get better positions than Bahrain, for example. This little place of Bahrain. You know, we want Egypt. We want to be the wakil in Egypt, the governor of Egypt. We want to be the governor of Iraq, Sham. People don't like it, they get jealous. It was no different in this case. I don't think this was not about money. This was about status. Sometimes the most just and the most spiritual among us become targets because of their sincerity. And because the Prophet pointed out the sincerity of Ali ibn Abi Talib time and time again to the community. And for those who perhaps didn't like it because of whatever jealousy they had towards Amir al-Mu'mineen, they would find an opportunity when they can take out that anger on him. Again, this is how it would be viewed from a 12 lens, through the riwayat of what 12 is believed to have come from the 6th Imam, from the 7th Imam, from Amir al-Mu'mineen himself, and some of the khutbahs of Nahj al-Balagha even.
Now, something just came to my mind, which is that the event of Saqifa, there was only about, 80 people that elected Abu Bakr? There was about 100 and something odd thousand Muslims back then. Were these 80 people, were they tribal leaders, or were they just normal individual so-called Sahaba who just said, right, we're just going to form this government and then we're going to enforce it on people? Because Amir al-Mu'mineen could easily take on 80 people if he wanted to, especially those 80 who, some of them have never killed anyone in battle. And Amir al-Mu'mineen was the one that was bringing victory to the religion of Islam. So was it a case of these guys were tribal leaders that would silence their tribes or make their tribes on their side? Or were they just normal people?
No, they were tribal leaders.
Oh.
They were important people in the community from among the Ansar and the Muhajirun, obviously, who did the coup d'etat. They were important people. Yeah. And however, interestingly enough, I know we're getting a little bit off track from Sayyidah Zahra, but it is all connected to the political events that took place. Abu Bakr's leadership shortly after came under another attack because in something known as the Rida Wars, because a large portion of Arabia didn't want to pay taxes anymore to him now that the Prophet has died. A question of legitimate authority had come up.
Not first time I've heard it.
Yeah. It's known as the Rida Wars,
Okay.
right? So then Abu Bakr launched a series of wars with Khalid ibn Walid to quell the rebellion in the peninsula. Minded, the question is, would have they accepted Ali either? We don't know. We don't know. If Amir al-Mu'mineen became the Khalifa, would have they also said, I'm not going to send taxes to him? But Abu Bakr had many problems, right? But this problem with Banu Hashim, this was a big one. And this was something that the tension would just not go away, because we have a narration from Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. I believe it's in the Ihtijaj of Tabarsi, or in one of the works of Sahib Bisharat al-Mustafa Tabari Shi'i, that is, the Shi'i Tabari, not the Sunni Tabari. And it's in one of those sources, I believe, where Imam al-Hassan calls out one of the killers of Fatima Zahra and reminds him of what he did to his mother, of slapping her, of hitting her. You know, we even read in Shajarat al-Tuba, written by one of the great scholars, Ayatollah al-Mazandarani, where he describes, based on the riwayat, this is very interesting, and I didn't see his sources, but the fact that Ayatollah Mazandarani writes this is interesting, is not interesting and sad. That they didn't only attack the house, but they slapped her. They really, I think another element of all of this that needs to come up, since we're talking about the events of Saqifa and what happened, is actually the treatment of women.
Yeah.
That there was a population of the community that still felt it was okay to physically abuse the vulnerable in our society. Vulnerable in the sense that the weaker physically in the society.
It's still present till today.
It's still it's a natural consequence of not fearing God, of not controlling oneself. And it's sad. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, there isn't much more to say about that. It's sad. It's terrible. And it is, I might add here, an explosive accusation, though, to put forward towards the companions of the Prophet. And I think it's for this reason that non-Shi'i scholars, particularly Sunni scholars, would find this proposition terribly offensive. Terribly, terribly offensive. I mean, it's looking at it as an academic, from an academic perspective is what I mean. This is here where Shiism and Sunnism is oil and water. That if a Sunni was to go into the Shi'i sources, although a lot of this is from Sunni sources, but some of those sources they may debate.
Yeah.
Or the Sunni was to go to the book of Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani, Sayyid Ja'far Murtada al-Amili, Sayyid Mahdi al-Khirsan, Abdul Mahdi Zahra, and on and on and on, about the event of Sayyid Zahra, Qadiyatu Zahra, the issue of Sayyid Zahra. As they flick through the pages, they would find they're almost exploring a world of complete, like, anti-orthodoxy.
Okay.
I don't know, heterodoxy. They would be terribly, terribly insulted.
Yeah.
But is that the fault of 12 Shi'is? Or is that just what's there in the sources?
Yeah, 100%.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, I think we have to be kind of real about these issues here. We have to be intellectually honest about these things.
Exactly.
I mean, it is there. Our Maraja have written about it, like Ayatollah Ja'far Subhani. These are not no-name scholars. These are not people we're finding from the little corner. Somebody has written, that this happens.
You're just picking them from the Hawza of Najaf and...
Just one person, no.
Have you written a book?
From Najaf or Qom, no.
Exactly.
These are great scholars. We respect, we admire Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani, Marhum Ayatollah Mirza Jawad Tabrizi. And we can debate among one another about the historicity of events, what they mean, their authenticity. That's all well and fine. But at the end of the day, the final matter comes down to the past and past events are perceived through different lenses. Shia have an identity that they have understood through the narrations that they have from the Ahlul Bayt, salamullahi alayhim. Sunnis have an identity that's formed through the narrations that they have. Let us just accept that the two identities are different.
Yeah. But
Not necessarily equal.
okay.
A Shi'i wouldn't say that, oh, just because you're different means that we're equal, that we respect equal in the sense of validity.
Okay.
Because the Quran says to seek truth. Seek haqq. Not to just say if there's two versions of the truth, just say they're both true. Doesn't work that way.
No, but I was gonna ask, do you think that when you say that these ahadith are found in sources of Sunni books or sources of Ahlus Sunnah, do you think that they invalidate these ahadith based on what the Orthodox Sunni creed or sect is supposed to believe?
I think from a Sunni perspective, let's be fair here for a moment. We want to be fair because all kinds of people will be watching and looking at this. They would say that these traditions about the conflict with Fatima Zahra are few. They would say they're not authentic. They're fabrications. It's all made up. And we in the sense, the hypothetical, non-Shi'i or someone from Ahlul Sunnah, mind you, this word Ahlul Sunnah is problematic, by the way. That's a much later concept that's come up, huh? Let me just put that. I don't even like using that word. Let us say proto-Sunni, let us say. Okay? I don't like this word Ahlul Sunnah, by the way. I'm not insulting anyone, just historically the word came up close to the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal as a concept to identify a group. So they would say that, well, all the narrations in Tabari and Baladuri and all these other sources, Tabari and Baladuri are just true, there are so many others. No. Perhaps they're not authentic, they're not correct, this and that. What we have is the fact for them that Abu Bakr and Umar are promised paradise, they're one of the greatest companions of the Prophet. Not only Abu Bakr and Umar, Uthman, I mean, a group of them. And the legacy of the Prophet flows through them. And all this other stuff, either we leave it to Allah to decide on the Day of Judgment, or we just say it's all made up and fabricated. Now a Shi'i would say,
Easy get out of jail card.
if we only had narrations from their books, then we would be in a little bit of trouble.
Okay.
We would be, perhaps, because they're saying according to our standards these are not authentic, and the narrations there are not Shi'i to begin with. But because we have an indication of riwayat from Ahlul Bayt describing this conflict between Banu Hashim and Sayyidah Zahra, this struggle between the two, and a violent struggle between the two, putting that together with khutbah fadakiyah, with the narrations that are found in the Sunni texts, in multiple books, even in the Mu'tazili texts. Some of the Mu'tazila believed that Fatima was murdered. Now, when we bring all this together, for the Shi'i, this fits into the broader notion of the betrayal of the Prophet's testament to the community, which is to follow Ali ibn Abi Talib. So for the Shi'i, they would say, this is just, the riwayah in Tabari, the riwayah in Baladuri, riwayat in other sources, is just, or the Musannaf of, I think Ibn Abi Shayba, one of the early Musannaf works, very early, like we're talking 3rd century. All of this indicates that you can't run away from the fact that something happened. The fact that these narrations have been preserved in early texts indicates that there was at least a large enough proportion of the community that believed that these events occurred. Especially when they're narrated by people who aren't Shi'is.
Ahsantum Sheikhna, I think we've come to the end of this episode, an episode that has turned into a lesson on Ilm al-Rijal, but inshallah we can all benefit from it. Brothers and sisters, join us tomorrow night as we finalize this discussion on the event of Fatemiyah, its importance in relation to our Shia identity. But from me, Sheikh Vinay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
أمار على عبد ضربني من ضربته